Hello and welcome to Beyond the Test Strasz Talks, our Strasz Assessment Systems podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rory McCorkle, and I'm excited about our topic today. We're going to be talking about an ever important topic in credentialing, and that is accreditation, especially accreditation in an age of quite a bit of change. My guest today is Jill Vanden Heuvel, and she is a very experienced psychometrician. Actually, Jill, I think you entered the industry right around the time that I did. So we both put our time in. But Jill, excited to have you here and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Rory. I really appreciate it.
So, Jill, as we always start off with our podcast, given the diversity of backgrounds we have in our field, I'd love to hear from you. What brought you into the assessment profession? How did you decide to become a psychomagician?
So, I don't think anybody has a straight path into this field. And like everybody else, mine was not linear. I thought I knew what I was going to go do after undergraduate, and it had nothing to do with assessment. And I sat down in the dreaded psychological statistics course, which was required for the psychology major that I was double majoring in, and it all made sense. And the professor looked at me and said, "This makes sense to you?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Okay, well, then we want to have you come back next semester as a helper in the lab and help other students." And I said, "Okay, that sounds great." And I didn't understand why people were struggling. And I was really fortunate. I was at Kane University in New Jersey, and they had several psychometricians as professors. And so I got a very rich background in psychometrics as an undergraduate. So I went on to graduate school, and my first semester of graduate school, I'd already taken those courses with the same textbooks. So I was already ready to go. But a big piece of it for me, I kind of stumbled into it, but then it was really about fairness. I was an awful test taker, awful. And when I took the GREs and took them into my department head, he legitimately looked at me and said, "What's plan B? Because you're not going to graduate school." Because I'd done that poorly. And he was shocked because he knew what I knew and was able to do. And I had no ability to demonstrate that in the GREs. And so I got very lucky that I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and they were willing to look past my GRE scores and admitted me into the master's program and said, "If you can be successful here, we can talk about the PhD program." And once I'd put in 1 year into the master's program, they said, "Clearly, your GRE scores did not represent who you are, how you think, and so forth. So we're going to bring you into the PhD program. You don't have to apply separately. You'll need to finish your master's, and you'll get a PhD." So I was one of the students who got both the master's and the PhD out of the program, as opposed to just entering the program for the PhD. So fairness was really huge for me, because I just felt like something must have been unfair for me to earn such low scores. And that was just true on all standardized tests. I did poorly on all of them that I took. So this felt like a good place to go to learn how to make those exams less tricky and help people really show what they knew and were able to do.
No, I love that. I think it's always meaningful when you can bring that kind of personal passion into one's work, because it really does help you get up and rocking in the morning when you have that kind of impetus for everything you're doing. You're joining us today to talk about accreditation, and you've had a wee bit of experience with that as an assessor, as well as, of course, consulting with a number of organizations who are accredited. Just to really take a look at accreditation with a wide lens, I've been in a number of organizations where that accreditation step is sometimes viewed as that compliance checkbox, almost like the same way we look at compliance with other types of laws and regulations, rather than a specific strategic step. I guess from your perspective, how can credentialing organizations really reframe accreditation and create a culture where it's viewed as something that strengthens quality and credibility within their environment?
Everything you just said absolutely resonates. And I think organizations need to learn how to view accreditation as illustrative of their commitment to doing credentialing well. And accreditation doesn't typically prescribe one specific way to accomplish the goals of credentialing program management, exam development, all of that. But accreditation helps organizations follow better ways to accomplish those goals, and making sure that there is that compliance step, but also the quality and the credibility. And so those internationally recognized standards, whether they're from ANAB or ICE or any of the many accrediting organizations that are out there, they help provide a benchmark for aligning with best practices. And so that stamp of accreditation can help show stakeholders that an organization really does take their credentialing program seriously. They believe in its quality, and that helps with wider adoption. It helps with sustainability. All of it kind of feeds itself. And so while it is probably a compliance check mark for people, it really does bring about a lot more than that and helps them be aligned with better ways of doing things. I'm not going to say the best way, because there isn't a single right way, but it helps them be more aligned with better ways of running and managing and doing all of the things of a credentialing program.
I couldn't agree more, and thank you for that. Emphasis on, standardized practice, not necessarily best practice, and it is an important differentiation for organizations to be aware of. Now, particularly in your work as an assessor and with your consulting work, where do you commonly see credentialing organizations struggle, whether it's a process aspect or a particular technical area that you find is often an area of deficit for organizations, let's say?
Sure. The biggest challenge I really see is documentation. Organizations have the people doing the things, and the things are the program operations and reviewing applications and running exam committees and exam development. There are people doing all of those things every day, and yet they're not documenting them. And so it's hard, especially when organizations first step to the plate to become accredited, for them to realize just how much documentation they need to have, because they need to be able to demonstrate to someone else what they're doing. It isn't just okay for it to be organizational knowledge. It really needs to be something that is detailed and explained such that anyone else could step in and do that step of the program operations or exam development without your key person being involved. And so that documentation tends to be difficult for folks. It's also hard for folks to understand where training and certification can intermingle and where they need to be separated. And some of that is because the different accreditation bodies have different guidelines and rules about that. And so what I say to organizations is know what the accrediting body you want to be accredited with accepts and allows, and then make sure you're aligned with that. And if there's a specific accreditation body that you want to be working with, be sure you're aligned with those requirements before you're applying for the accreditation.
Mm.
So I really, the training and certification and the separation, the firewall versus the commingling is definitely hard. The documentation is hard. And then as a psychometrician, I will admit that the answer to every question from a psychometrician is it depends. And so an organization will come to me and say, what do we do about this? Or they'll go to their in-house psychometrician. What do we do about this? And I'm always going to ask a question because I need more context to know the right answer. And there's probably not a single right answer. It's not a selected response type of question. And so the more context an organization can give to their psychometrician, to the accrediting body as they submit their documentation, the more context that can be there, the easier it is going to be for your psychometrician to respond, for the accrediting body to not to need to come back with more questions about the application or the materials submitted. And so I'll just put out there that context really, really matters. And it's not just your psychometricians that are always saying it depends, but I will admit to being totally guilty of saying it depends on a very regular basis.
Well, but I think you bring up a great point there, Jill, and that is, to the reference we made earlier, there's a number of different ways to address, let's say an element of a standard. And, if an I heard a critique actually a couple of weeks ago that, at times accreditation, this individual felt encourage complacency in the industry. And I was quick to snap on that because I said, well, actually, organizations are permitted to do a lot of novel things. It's about justifying that, showing literature to support what you're doing, making that argument on why that is psychometrically defensible or what have you. It turned into a really interesting conversation, but I think you're getting exactly to that, doing your homework on the whys and wherefores, and then presenting that argument in a way in which that third party, whether it's you or someone else, can readily understand the logic, the process, and be able to walk away with that is so critical.
It really is. It really is.
Well, I mentioned at the very beginning, we're talking about accreditation in an age of change. And of course, far be it from me to have a podcast where I don't mention AI at least once. Naturally, we know that's, one element of the evolution, but we've also seen evolution with our delivery methods and the ups and downs of remote proctoring, movement to continuing competency models, longitudinal assessment. I could go on, but for the purposes of our conversation, as a psychometrician, where do you see that tension and, I don't know, maybe the resolution between innovation and defensibility?
That's an amazing question. Innovation and change are constants. That's nature in most industries, and that's very true in credentialing as well. The idea of, for example, automatic item generation, that idea was published as early as 1969. So it's not a new idea to be thinking about and exploring automatic item generation, but it's more feasible to do now because of our computing powers and things like that. We're actually able to implement these ideas that were first conceived of many, many years ago. And so those things are accessible to us in a way that they hadn't been when they were first introduced. And even the idea of delivery models changing. Totally dating myself here, but in high school, I took part in a study about delivering the SATs via computer. And
Yeah.
because we didn't all have computers. It wasn't an idea that every home had a computer, let alone every person, let alone all of us walking around with little computers in our pockets, which are our phones. And so everything is constantly evolving and everything is constantly changing. How do you retain defensibility? Human oversight. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And so it almost goes back a little bit to the last question you asked, which is
Mhm.
the documentation, the rationale, the why behind the what. And so even machines make mistakes. There are error tolerances in every industry of manufacturing and so forth. There's acceptable error tolerances. And that's true in our industry. We talk about standard error of measurement and things like that. But that means that AI isn't perfect either. And we've all seen places where there have been AI fails. Human oversight will help to avoid those fails. Human oversight will help to make sure that AI or whatever technology we're talking about is doing what we think we asked it to do. And so I really think that the defensibility is going to land on human oversight. Can humans make mistakes? Absolutely. But so can machines and so can technology. And so right now, I think we're in a really unique intersection of a lot of accreditation standards kind of pivoting and coming up to speed with how AI can be adopted and do so responsibly in an industry that tends to move a little bit slowly. And so there's new standards coming out for lots of accrediting bodies, and they're starting to bring in AI and starting to try to be flexible in how those standards will be interpreted and and best future proof them to the extent possible, because all of those accreditation standards they can't pivot on a dime. It's years of committees and working, especially some of the big international ones. I mean, new standards don't just appear in a day, so they've really tried to future proof and make sure that they don't unnecessarily constrain organizations while recognizing that change is inevitable and it is a constant. So I think that we need to just stay focused on that human oversight to help maintain the defensibility and not just assume that because we asked AI to do something that it's right. There was a commercial years ago about, well, the internet said that this is this person, and you saw somebody else walking down the street, but the internet said that this is who it was, so they must be right. It's the same thing with AI. Just because it says it doesn't mean it's right. Human oversight is necessary to make sure that it's right.
Well, and Jill, you've brought a couple things forward here that I really want to key in on. I mean, to the last points that you were bringing up, whether using an automated system or a human process, traceability, and this also goes into your documentation point, traceability and understanding how did we get from X to Y is so critical,
Yes.
particularly, of course, with automated systems, but also with human processes. And is something that groups should certainly consider and look at as they look at these systems. Do they have that degree of transparency to be able to do that traceability? I also love you bringing up the fact that these ideas are not new, and it cracks me up because I go back to a pilot that I did at a prior organization where 15 years ago, we were generating items for automatically using NLP for an exam. And again, well documented in the literature. And we should be careful to not forget that lineage, because sometimes it's very instructive.
Yes. Yes.
I'm also curious to just hear, as again, and particularly from a psychometrician standpoint, when organizations maybe sit down with you when you're been assigned as their assessor for the first time, or even if an organization is going for reaccreditation, but know they have some substantive changes to what they're doing, what advice? Obviously, I know you can't give advice as an assessor. So putting on your consulting hat, what advice would you give leaders, in the credentialing space to just ensure that accreditation aspect becomes embedded in culture more broadly and be able to meet those milestones with maybe more enthusiasm than dread?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of organizations, there is that element of dread for the person putting together the application and so forth. My first statement to any organization would be, why are you pursuing accreditation? Even if it's a reaccreditation, why are you pursuing it? What is the reason for your organization that to pursue the accreditation, and what is the value add for your organization? Accreditation isn't a one size fits all approach. Not every organization needs to be accredited. And I'm sure that there's folks looking at me right now thinking, but you're an assessor for different accrediting organizations. Don't you think everybody should be accredited? I think accreditation, as I'd said earlier, is a great way to show that you're aligning with good practice and so forth, but it's not right for everybody. So first, is it the right fit for your organization and what you want to do? If it's a good fit, then leaders absolutely need to recognize the time and effort that will be needed for accreditation. If you want to be accredited, you need to recognize that your people are going to need time and money in order to do all of the steps of their job and their role correctly and in alignment with those accreditation standards. That can be a really hard sell organizationally, because this is frequently going to come off as administrative types of time, and businesses aren't in the business of paying internal people that aren't necessarily bringing in revenue. And so it can be hard for leaders to see why they need to be doing that and paying people to deal with the accreditation and making sure that all their program is aligned with the accreditation standards. So leaders need to really buy in to the value of the accreditation and what that will ultimately bring. And a part of that buy-in is supporting their team and recognizing that non-billable or non-revenue generating time that the team is going to need to spend to be accredited and maintain accreditation. So really, I think that would be the key takeaway for leaders, is recognize that it will be time and money that you need to put forth into this process that goes well beyond an application fee. It's salaries and full-time jobs for people to be doing this and doing it well.
No, I love that mention, and just, understanding also, that it's an educational process, in that many times leaders are not going to be as cognizant of what this means, and it's incumbent upon the internal groups to do that education up for that to be well understood. Well, maybe Jill, so that we end on a more positive note, I'd love for you to, thinking through the groups that you've supported or assessed, maybe what are one or two of the key benefits that you've seen come out of the accreditation process for organizations, even if it's as minute as, impacting their own internal processes.
So, and I don't think impacting their own internal processes is even minute. I think
that's fair.
I've seen organizations be able to really take that documentation and bring people not only up to speed, but also be able to promote people through the organization. So somebody comes in maybe as a representative or an application reviewer and can move forward and upwards over time and become the credentialing officer or the person in charge of all of the exam development. And so I really love those growth opportunities that can exist within an organization. And in part, it's because of the work that they went through in the accreditation process and the documentation that makes a very clear career path for somebody as they want to move forward. So that's one element. I think another piece of it is the ability for accredited organizations to work together and help each other when in industries that might not be competing, or sometimes they even are competing, but to recognize how they can all make things better together, and that they can learn from one another and help implement processes together or develop things together and lighten the load individually. So and I've seen that happen with different standards development organizations, really coming together and working together to find what are the common problems we're struggling with and how did you solve it? And then another organization going, well, that's amazing. And finding similar solutions that meet their industry's needs. So really customizing in that way.
No, I love both of those mentions, particularly the former, since as I think 23 years ago, I started in the industry as a proctor. So, it's absolutely a great way to illustrate and be able to create both succession planning and promotional planning. So, love that mention. Jill, thanks so much for joining, and so appreciate your perspective, having been on a couple different sides of these equations here. Really appreciate that. For our listeners, thank you for joining. We appreciate your time as well. We do encourage you to be on the lookout for the next episode, which should be out in about 2 weeks. And of course, heartily encourage everybody. If you have questions about some of the things we've talked about, please feel free to get in touch with Jill and queue up some of those questions to her. With that said, in the meantime, be safe and be well. We look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.